Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is Independent School District 832, Mahtomedi Public Schools, regular board meeting on Thursday, September 24th. It's a little after 7 p.m. We were working on technology. So welcome. First thing I'd like to do is roll call of attendance.
Done.
Thank you. I would like to announce tonight to the public that Mike Chevalier has submitted his resignation, and we will discuss his resignation will not be effective until later this month. And so we will, as a board, address that once his resignation time has come, but he has submitted his resignation. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Julie, second by Kevin. Any discussion on the agenda? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Next, we have the approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Moved by Julie, seconded by Kevin. Any discussion on the consent agenda? All right, all those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, this evening we'll have no presentations or recognitions this month, but next we have report from our student representative. Would you like to introduce our new
So
student?
I'm excited that to introduce our new student school board representative, Ismail Ba. He has been very active already. I've been talking to him since last spring on a regular basis. He's made it very clear he wants to be the voice of the students, and he has already begun with that. But he's, like I've said, met with me a number of times about issues that concern our students. And so I'm excited for your first meeting and to introduce you to the whole public, and I know you have a few updates for us, so welcome.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Again, my name is Ismail. I am the school board representative on SLC. A little bit about myself. I'm a senior. I run cross country and track, and this year I am trying Nordic skiing for the first time. So I'm just going to start my report. Wildwood, they started school September 8th for first and second graders, while on the 10th, kindergartners had their first. An upcoming event at Wildwood includes a virtual fun run from October 9th through the 11th. OH Anderson started school for their kids as well on September 8th, as well as the middle school and high school. I couldn't find too many events happening in the middle school for this month, but I'll keep you guys updated for the next months. So in the high school, as we all know, the Minnesota State High School League voted to cancel girls volleyball and boys football until the spring of 2021, but then I had to change it because just this past Monday, they revoked that decision and they started back football and volleyball this fall season. Over the beginning of this school year and towards the end of last school year, SLC came together, me, Luke Wisniewski, and Mr. Lane, our advisor, came together and created an SLC subcommittee for anti-racism and equity. With the killing of George Floyd, many social movements sparked all around the world. Luke Wisniewski and I saw the need for a similar change in Mahtomedi, so we consulted Laura Rorick and Mr. Lane and started a subcommittee in SLC that deals with anti-racism and equity. So our plan is to be anti-racism, be anti-racist, and build a more equitable environment for all. We are planning an education week starting October 19th through the 23rd, and we already have collaborations set up with BASE, Human Rights Club, Interact, Mr. Bacon's podcast, GSA, FCA, SAD, STEM Club, and NHS. So you guys are probably wondering, what is BASE? That is a new club founded this year by Tolu Akintola, Chloe Bromlin, Smitri Samanti, and Jackie Ong, supervised by Mr. Kevin Bacon. It was created because it was inspired by this Think Safe group that ended about a year or two ago. Their mission, in their own words, is to hold conversations, to educate themselves, to educate ourselves on current events, provide a safe space for everyone to express their opinions and experiences, and advocate for all backgrounds and cultures. Sorry, I forgot to mention this, but BASE stands for Building Awareness Surrounding Equity. And that is my student report.
Thank you and welcome.
Next, we have discussion and information items. The first item is the board calendar, and that is in the board book. I do notice that we will need to replace Mike Chevalier on AMSD. Is there someone who's available to attend AMSD on October 2nd?
I could do that.
Kevin, thank you. Others can go as well, but knowing that you'll for sure be there is helpful. Thank you.
Is it virtual?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So does everyone get the meeting announcements?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. I do. I will forward the announcement to you when it comes.
Be great. And a Zoom link, I assume?
Yep, it's a Zoom link that you can attend. Do others want to attend as well?
Forward it, just in case.
Yeah, I'd be glad to.
I think I get it. I think I signed up for it,
Yeah.
so.
I'm not sure how that list works, but we can investigate that. So just in terms of timeliness, Kevin, I'll forward it to you this month, and I'll follow up with Scott Kroonquist to see about getting other board members on that list.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, other calendar items that people would like to call out or bring attention to. I have two I want to speak to. One is we have MEA Professional Conference Days coming up October 15th and 16th. These are days where school is not in session as an opportunity for teachers and others to have professional development. And we have spent a lot of time this summer, our teachers and our administrators, doing a lot of professional development in preparation for hybrid learning. So I'd like to really encourage our teachers and our administrators especially to take time off during that time in order to refresh and rejuvenate and be able to come back and continue the hard work that they're doing. Then the other one I want to call out is on Thursday, October 22nd, before our school board meeting, we have the World's Best Workforce presentation, which is usually done by Lynn Vieker. It's a very nice presentation in terms of overviewing a number of things about our district. It'd be great if board members could be here for that at 6 p.m. so we can hear the whole presentation with the community at that time. Any other items that you'd like to call out? Alrighty. Next, we have the first reading of some policies. Barb.
Yeah, so the first one, sorry, I thought I had this open and I didn't, but there we go. So the first one is really quick. It is the policy that lists our policies, essentially, that we have. And so I'm going to be sharing with you updates to policy 522 as a first reading, and so that is the one change to the 422 is that 522 is being updated. So with this policy, there's really nothing else to mention there. And so policy 522 is the Title IX sex non-discrimination policy, grievance procedure and process. And so this policy has had quite a bit of updates. What you have in front of you is the model policy from MSBA. And these new regulations went into effect this summer, in August. And so the big changes, well.
Can you put that up on the screen? Does that go up there?
The policies, oh, we could, yeah, there we go.
Okay. I see it on there, so that's why I thought maybe we could.
Do I have the, is it over there? Or you, is it up there? I don't know how much scrolling through this I would want to do, but I can put it up here anyway, and if you want me to, I can. So with this policy, so I will say that we have had some training on this policy so far, and there's more training to go. But I think some big takeaways we have is that this policy was written with, the Title IX update was written with higher ed in mind, because the way it's written doesn't really align with how we organize ourselves at a K-12 in in secondary schools or in K-12. So, so but we're working on how to organize ourselves. In particular, we've always identified a Title IX coordinator. That's typical. That's been happening for a long time. But now we also have other roles that have to be separated. So Title IX coordinator, there needs to be an investigator, or investigators, decision maker for appeals, and then individuals who facilitate an informed resolution process. So there's more detail that needs to be spelled out than previously. I'd say that there's some other procedural things that we need to do, grievance procedures documents, but I think the big thing is we have some new training to do around what is the actual process that we need to follow. We have certain people that need to have certain roles that aren't supposed to cross. And it's so that if there's a Title IX complaint, it's clear that there are different people hearing and considering the complaint, I think are some of the big takeaways. However, we still have some work to do on that. But part of this is we do need to adopt this policy, and so this is our first reading. And as we come to our second reading and our third, I will give you some updates on the training and where, for example, where you would be able to find that training that we do with each of the members of this policy. But we do need to get this policy started in terms of going through our three readings. So.
Questions, additional information requests? Kevin, go ahead.
I'm curious if MSBA gave us the model policy, why they didn't tailor this more for a K-12 than a...
Well, I think the way
Just the way it's worded? Okay.
The new regulations are specifically, were written with higher ed in mind, but it has been, it's the model policy for us. Mm-hmm.
And we're past the August implementation date, but that has to do with the timeline from the federal government in time for us to respond. And so we're not late in the sense that everyone's in the same boat we are. The model policy came out in August after it was supposed to be already implemented. Because we've already moved in terms of doing the things in the policy, I think it's best that we continue down the pathway of the three readings and not immediately adopt. And that's something Barb and I had talked about, is to continue down that regular pathway with it, because we are implementing it now and abiding by law, but we're making sure we've got the policy in place.
And it allows you to ask questions that we can come back and give better clarification on as we go forward.
Right. Any other questions or things for Barb to come back with next time? Okay. If you think of anything, you can just email Barb directly, and then at the next meeting, we can have a second reading and keep that moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And anything that we change, we continue to highlight in the next reading.
Right. We'll do
so everyone can
red
see.
Line any
That's
changes.
Perfect. Yeah.
All right. Now on to action items. First action item is approval of donations and grants. There were no donations in August, but I did want to thank a number of parents, community members who volunteer a lot of their time in our schools. We don't see their donations on our list, but we do have a lot of people who donate a lot of time. Some of those people are in the audience, and I want to thank people for not only their donations, but their time. Next, we have the approval of the preliminary 2020 pay 2021 levy certification.
Good evening. Yeah, as part of the annual levy certification process, boards are required to certify the preliminary levy by September 30, and then subsequent to our truth in taxation hearing, I think December 10th. It's a good thing that date's in the PowerPoint later. So December 10, 12. Then we submit the final levy to the Department of Revenue, and or truth in taxation compliance, and the final levy to MDE. So the school district taxes represents about, in our general fund, about 22% of our total revenue. Taxes are comprised of operating referendum, so these are the voter-approved type of levies. Operating referendum, capital projects, also known as technology, and then bonded debt, and you're levying for the amortization of principal and interest. And then there are discretionary levies, and these are for expenditures that are authorized in law, and I'm listing a few of them here. So like, for instance, long-term facilities maintenance, safe schools, building lease, it's operating capital, Q comp, et cetera. So looking at our, what this shows here is our proposed levy, proposed pay 21, and I should point out, pay 21 is going to pay for the 21-22 school year. So this is where we're kind of, we talked earlier about starting to build that budget for that next year. This is the property tax component of revenue. So if we look at general fund, it's up about $303,000. I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. Community education is a decrease, but in these levies are, a lot of times, are prior year adjustments. Because if you think about it, we're setting a levy for the school year 22. And so we're using a lot of estimates, enrollment, expenditure estimates. So when those finals become known, then there are adjustments to levies. So in the case of community education, in the pay 20 levy, there was an adjustment for school-age child care expenditures of about, I want to say about $60,000. So that doesn't roll forward in the pay 21, so that's why you see that that decrease there. Debt service simply follows our amortization schedule for bonded principal and interest. So total going across, and I'm putting totals here, but when the board approves this levy, you're doing it at the maximum level. And you do that because there's a 40-page little printout full of calculations that gives us that number. And so I think in the last week, I got a report every day from MDE with a tiny little change. And I noticed that on here, so I also gave you kind of a detailed sheet. That says $15,152,630. So all those changes even caught me here putting this presentation together. So it's still 2.15%, but I think that number, so the number that's on that sheet is the amount that we're working with right now. But there's going to be changes. So there's going to be minor changes. School boards typically approve at the maximum level, so you don't have to reconvene because there is a $200 adjustment to a lease levy. So when we do the final in December, then you're going to be required to do, might be that $15,152, but in December you have to do a specific dollar amount. But you don't want to do that now. So Mr. Donovan will be happy to see at the bottom of that there's a percent, 2.15%. So when we look at that increase in the general fund, so a lot of times that can be, the levy goes up, but the school district doesn't get any additional revenue. And that's because if you take a look at, so for pay 20 that we're looking at, that's based on, all the calculations are based on the 2018 referendum market value. And for the current year, it's based on the 2019 referendum market value. So you can see that increase there from 2.2 to 2.4. So that can, and then take our operating referendum, for example, 1,020 per student. So we're not going to get any more than that. What this does is shift some of that, reduces state aid, increases the levy. So you can have that increase of 303,000, that's reflected in the general fund, without us receiving any additional revenue. So I think of that, go back to that, of that 303, I think it's about 200,000 is, so it's the local optional, operating referendum, capital, it's those kinds of things where we're seeing it split, an increase in levy, decrease in state aid. That's accounting for that increase. I did say capital projects is the one exception where that's a levy based on, it's a rate times our tax capacity. So as tax capacity increases, then we will get additional dollars in the capital projects levy. Then I've prepared this slide that estimates the tax impacts. So looking at pay 20 to pay 21 with the rates that are calculated. And I used two levels of homes, 250,000. I got up on top, the 4.31% increase. That's got that from an estimate from Washington County. And I think that was for the city of Mahtomedi. So they're estimating an increase market value across the district at that 4.31%. So I built that in here. So for $250,000 home, we would see it would go to 260, and at $32.95 increase, 2.36%. Same thing with the little more dollars, but same percent with the 500,000. Some people have asked, well, if the levy went up 2.15%, why didn't this number go up that same amount? So remember on that slide, we look at the calculations for pay 21 come from the market value, referendum market value, and tax capacity value of 2019. When we get to this slide, now we're estimating what's the current property tax base, so it's a different number. And then this also factors in something called fiscal disparities that may reduce its contribution to levy. It can be a distribution to reduce total levy, so that gets factored in here as well. So based on the levy we put together, the calculations that are there, this is what we're looking at for pay 21 at 2.36%. And so we asked the board to approve the levy at the maximum allowable for taxes payable in 2021. And again, as I mentioned, precludes you from, and like I say, I got 5 reports in 5 days, and they were changing by $30 for this piece and $20 for, you don't want to reconvene to act on those changes. And then December 10th, we'll have our truth and taxation hearing, and then that levy will be a specific dollar amount levy. You can't do a maximum at that time. It'll be 15 million, wherever that ends up. So it's going to be really close to that number that you're seeing there. So, questions?
So every year, we always do it this way. We approve the maximum amount,
yeah.
so this is nothing
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen a board do something other than that,
Right.
that maximum.
Okay.
So, unless you want to meet every night.
I do not. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? All right. So we need to have a motion. This is an action item.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. So moved by Kevin to approve the preliminary 2020 pay 2021 levy certification, seconded by Stacy. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
These are hot off the press. We are now talking about the approval of MSBA legislative resolutions. And so last meeting at the study session, we discussed two ideas around things we could submit for the delegate assembly. One was around the finance model for the state of Minnesota for schools, and in looking at what the finance work group has done, they are still in progress. They are not done with their work, and so it's a little premature to be offering endorsement of that work without knowing the total implications to our districts and others in the state. And so I'm not pursuing that. If someone else has that on their mind still, that's something we can talk about, but I did not write anything up for that because I was concerned about the implications and not enough time to really look at those recommendations and the impact on our district. So that one I just sort of pushed aside. So the one that you have in front of you is looking at eliminating the requirements of instruction. So this is a piece in talking with the conversation we had at the study session around barriers and things to innovation. This is one that's come up across many districts, similar to a proposal Lakeville put forward last year that failed at delegate assembly. Slightly different though in the way it's approached. And through conversations with Denise Dietrich at MSBA, this would be very helpful to us and many other districts, because remember, we've got two things that we have to abide by in the statute, and I've pasted the statute in there for you, is this talks about the length of the school year and the hours of instruction. And so what I'm proposing that we potentially put forward, we'll have a vote, obviously, is that keep the 165 days of instruction, but do away with the hours of instruction requirements. That would allow us to continue to do things hybrid, if that worked for some students, continue to look at other ways to use time, because we're held accountable for learning through the standards. And different students will meet those standards in different timelines. They might meet them in different ways that could cause problems with the instructional hours. And so the instructional hours, to me, are counterintuitive to a standards-based model. So if you have standards that you must meet, you're going to meet those, but the hours of instruction say you have to sit in a seat for so long. And so this would also open up some doorways for us and other districts and maybe looking at internships, service learning opportunities, and things like that as well. And service learning is part of our strategic plan in terms of looking at civic engagement. So all I've got on this paper are some really basic ideas. These aren't due till tomorrow.
Lots of time in this.
Got all kinds of time. So I wrote down some beginning ideas and looking for some discussion and then possible endorsement from the board to continue to move this forward for the delegate assembly. Us endorsing it moving forward does not mean the delegate assembly will endorse and move it forward, and then the delegate assembly process then just says it becomes part of the MSBA platform, meaning that MSBA would advocate for this in situations that come up in conversation when they're meeting with legislators and things. So that's my presentation. If people have questions, or Kevin.
So looking at what you've got here, I think the key, having argued many of these over time, the key word here, I believe, is flexibility. And it seems as if when I have argued and when others have argued, when they used flexibility, it seems like the delegate assembly does resonate with that. So I think that's the key thing here. It gives school districts the flexibility to do the best for their students. Are you getting any sense of, I mean, I'm imagining from what Denise said is that this would most likely get affirmation from the MSBA board?
Follow up with her again, but in our initial conversations, yes, it seemed that way.
That too helps. I think
Yes.
this is great. Nice job.
So I also appreciate your focus on language in terms of what's written, so I'll incorporate that word flexibility, but I think the other word that would be very, very helpful is local control in terms of thinking about how that works, and that came to mind too, so.
And I would just agree with Kevin, and because when you read it, be it resolved, MSBA urges the legislature to remove instructional hours requirements sounds, you're not saying what you want to replace it with. So I like those two words, so if there's a way to put it in there, because Otherwise, it just, you have written a great explanation in here of what I've just read quickly. But if it were in that summary, I think that would go a lot further.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. I did forget to mention too, the piece on the bottom of page 1 that describes it is what I wrote on the back in italics. This is language taken from the Lakeville last year, and I've been trying to reach out to Lakeville Board Chair to have a conversation with them. And so I haven't decided how much of this language to pull in as well, but this is the exact language I used last year. But their resolution at the top, the summary, as Stacy said, was much different, and they were going after a different part, but I think their reasoning is very sound. So, Julie, do you have something too?
Yeah, as I have their resolution before me from last year, and they got very specific about what they were looking at, even though their explanation explained very clearly that they were looking for meaningful experiences, the most meaningful experiences for students on how to deliver instruction creatively. And so MSBA did not endorse it last year, and it failed 88 to 24. So the wording is really important. So
What we're for, not just what we want out of there, is good.
that's because I think, quite honestly, sometimes when the resolutions come up, okay, my feeling when I see this urges the legislature to remove instructional hours, it makes it sound like you're cutting out curriculum or something. You know what I mean? Like, that's sometimes what resonates with people. So if there's some other way that that could be worded, I would work on it.
Yes. Okay, that's helpful. I think adding the piece about, what we want to replace it with, but then softening that beginning language makes a lot of sense.
Yes. To make it clearer, but not quite as specific. It was last year, so somewhere in between, Lucy. I really, to sit and watch how it is picked apart sometime at the assembly is, as Kevin knows, painful. So I can hardly wait to do it on Zoom this year.
Well, you haven't had to stand up in the dais and run.
Oh, I know, to keep order, so
That's the worst, that was almost the deal breaker as far as being MSBA president, is you're going to have to run that meeting. I'm like, no. So what I'm wondering is, for last year, when this came forward, or something like this came forward, was it because it was in lieu of current policy, or was there some other alternative that seemed to be better? It seemed to me there was like 3 that were kind of along the
they
same.
opposed in lieu of present policy.
They were going after something different in their summary. If you go back to the front page, what's their,
So, but, okay, so they recommended opposition because the existing policy supported each school district to plan its own programs within the guidelines of the Minnesota Department of Education in organizing the district's education programs, such as hours, locations, and during which the students may pursue their goals.
but their resolution was more around internships and off-campus kinds of work.
It was to reclassify seat time requirement to include other options such as internship hours, standards-based credits, and flexible learning. That sounds flexible to me, but seriously, it was picked apart.
It might be helpful to, was it Farmington? Was that
Lakeville.
Lakeville? It might be helpful to talk to them.
Yep, I've reached out to the chair and have not heard back yet.
Okay. I mean, just, again, the more people you can get up, stand up, speak in favor of something,
Right.
just really helps the process along, so.
So I'll continue that if the board endorses this concept.
Yes. I think you should go for it.
So when the resolutions are submitted there, one of the check boxes is this an individual resolution or is this supported by the board? And so, yes, I will continue to work on it based on your feedback. I can send you another draft tomorrow during the day if you want to look at it, or if you want to endorse the concept, I can continue to work and say it's board endorsed. It's up to the will of the group.
Do you actually need a formal endorsement? I mean,
I think that makes it stronger. There's not a question then, because there would be no action for me to fall back on.
But I mean, are you looking for
Like a
something,
motion?
right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Is that what you're asking? I'm sorry. I thought you were questioning, should I ask for it?
Yep.
Yes,
Yes.
a motion would be great.
Okay, well, I'll make the motion that we carry this forward with your modifications.
Second.
Thank you. So moved by Kevin, second by Stacy. Any other discussion? Thank you. Ismail, as a student, do you have questions or concerns about the possibility of doing away with the number of hours, seat time kinds of things?
I don't know if I'm, I guess, fully qualified to do that. I am doing fully distance this year. So if we were to bring this up at our next meeting, I could bring in some hybrid students to say their own opinion on the matter, because I know some of them want, I think, more class time. They feel like they're being like rushed. It is different, but yeah.
That's helpful. I guess what we're trying to do is say it should be up to the district to decide how much seat time versus distance time, and give districts, teachers options. Because right now, if we weren't in COVID, and you were, last year, early in the year, you would have to be in that school building a certain amount of time, the number of hours listed on the paper there for a high schooler. But do you think changing that number of hours, but still knowing you had to meet the standards and the teachers were going to, work with you to meet those standards, would that concern you, leaving it to local district control as a student?
As long as the decision is made by, I guess, the students who are doing those hybrid learning. And I just have like a question by, what do you mean by instructional hours? Because when I'm doing my distance learning, it's more like a sit and watch. There's some days where I just check in, the teacher says, here's your assignment, go ahead and do it. And that's my instructional hours. And other days I'm just sitting there doing the live stream with my work already completed, but just going over there, being a part of the class. So I just want, I guess, more clarification of what you mean instructional hours in this, I guess, in that sense.
So what the piece there with instructional hours is from the statute. I didn't write that.
Well, and so, you've kind of hit on the point of this,
Right.
is that the amount, what you do in a class, or how you spend your time can look really different. And the point of what we're looking for, or what you've been talking about, is the idea of having more flexibility of what things could look like. So, for example, do you have to be in the classroom? Like we're accustomed to a model where you always show up in the classroom. But are there things that you could be doing outside the classroom or from a distance? So that's the idea, is to have more flexibility with that. But now you've also hit, so he does not know this yet, but we are going to talk about bringing, I think it would be really valuable to have you be able to report back on some of your experiences and some of your fellow students' experiences this year in the future, because it sounds like you have some thoughts on that already, and there'll be even more, I think, come October. So, just so you know, you have a whole month before we spring it on you, so.
Thank you for your input. That helps a lot too, in knowing what pieces you question, because this will go in front of board members who haven't seen it before. And so knowing that the question around hours of instruction, things like that, will need to be explained a little bit more in the presentation or the written documentation for other board members who might not be familiar with this is really helpful. So thank you for that. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for your input. I have extra copies if members of the public want to see that. Next, we have approval of the superintendent and school board goals.
Yes. So you have these in your packet, and what I did was I took our conversation from the last study session where we went through our goals. Previously, they were really written with kind of a focus. We started my first year with a focus on the transition, and then the next year we started really focusing in on both our strategic plan and budget as kind of big overarching goals. This time, we had a conversation about how do we continue to talk about our strategic plan in our current context, which kind of turned things around a little bit for us. So I think what you see, I hope what you see in front of you is a combination of talking about continuing our work and our focus on our strategic plan. Specifically, we talked in previous year about really focusing in on strategy 3, which is the one around organizational capacity and building organizational capacity, which is a continuation of the work that we had done the previous year, but also really acknowledging the context we're in and how COVID-19 and the pandemic has changed our work and the way we need to think about it. So that's what is reflected here in these goals, and I know you had a chance to talk about them and see them, so I'm putting them forward to you to recommend that you approve.
Discussion? You want to start with a motion and we'll discuss?
I just wanted to thank you for adding the piece on the equity in that document. As far as resource allocation, I think that's helpful.
I want to say, Barb, I really appreciate how you rewrote them. I really like this layout. Obviously, I think all of them are very important, but I did want to call out, because I just think this is so good, that because we oversee the budget, and one of our goals is to prioritize funding for immediate needs with regard to health and safety, as well as technology access and staffing to, if we're able to return to full-time at some point, that we'll have enough staff. So I think all of that is extremely important, as well as funding for professional development for staff to support instructional rigor and engagement. And as Ismail was telling his story, that came to mind again, because we want to make sure that, because this year looks so different, that we are looking where all those opportunities lie, that we can be shoring up where those challenges are. So I really like the layout, and that one just came to mind as he was talking. I thought we've really got to make sure we're on top of that.
Great. Other goals or things you want to talk about specifically?
I move approval.
Okay.
Oh, second.
Julie's moved approval, Stacy seconded. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So these will be our goals for the year. And we'll revisit them again probably in January to check in mid-year to see how we're doing on those goals. Wonderful. All right. Next, we have approval of policy 597, telerelated service policy.
So that's you, Tony.
That's Tony.
Tony's going to talk to us about a policy we need to have in place because of our new context, our current context.
So, good evening, everybody. Yeah, speaking of doing things differently, so one source of revenue for our special education department is through third-party billing. And what that means is when students have related services designated in their IEP, and they also receive Minnesota healthcare programs, that we're able to then seek reimbursement through the Department of Human Services for the service provision that we do for those students. So it is a source of revenue. It's part of how we do business. But just like everything else, in March things change. So whereas these services are always provided in person, and part of the billing stipulation was that they were being provided in person, was no longer an option. So we've had to move to a tele-related services. So part of that, as they expanded that the criteria that we could receive reimbursement for this, is that they are sending out an application of assurances that I have to send in, and I have to assure that we have a policy and procedure in place that address certain things. So those certain things are exactly what you see in the policy. So really, this policy is outlining the procedures that we currently have in place. It's just now it's a policy form, so it checks both those boxes, so now we can apply and then continue to seek reimbursement and generate revenue for these services. The stipulation is that as of right now, once things resume and we're no longer in a pandemic situation, that they would go back to having these services solely in person. But as of right now, as of our current situation, we would need to approve this so that we can continue to seek reimbursement for third-party billing.
Questions for Tony? So this is not an MSBA model policy, because that's usually something we
Yeah.
about.
Yep, and this is a policy, it isn't something that I drafted off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, this is something I've worked with other directors in other school districts that has come from legal guidance that looked at the statement of assurances and then took a look at that and translated it into a policy. So it's pretty consistent with what other school districts are using to meet this criteria.
Other questions? So we are asking for action tonight on this, which is unusual. Usually we have policy that says we do two readings and then an adoption, but because of the timeline, we need to move more quickly on this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Move approval.
Thank you. Thank you. Kevin, could I clarify that your approval is not only for the policy at hand, but to waive our policy on policies? I forget the number. But just so
Correct.
it's clear that we're
Correct.
deciding to make action tonight, knowing that we're going around that policy.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to be clear. So moved by Kevin, second by Stacy. Any other discussion on this policy? So at the end of the pandemic, we're going to have to come in and undo the policy, delete the policy, or is this?
Well, it would be in there and it may no longer be, applicable to how we do
Okay,
business, so.
okay.
I will certainly
It'll come back to us.
keep you updated on that.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Yep.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Tony. All right, next we have school board committee reports, AMSD.
Yes, I went, and the main topic for AMSD at the most recent meeting in September was the survey by Morris Leatherman. Sorry, I lost the name for a second there. And I did forward it to you after I had attended, so you've seen it. And that truly was the main topic. It's an annual survey they do to just inform us of they take a pulse on a number of things so that they compare from year to year. And then they ask questions that they're just curious about. So that was what you saw there in that presentation.
And that presentation's on their website too, if other people want.
I just looked, I don't know that it is anymore.
Okay.
So I think I would have to ask about that, but I did send it to you at the time, so.
Yep. Okay, that was AMSD. MAFE, Julie.
The MAFE Education Foundation Board meeting was on Monday, and there wasn't a lot that happened at the meeting, but Barb gave a good update with some information that people may be interested in. She gave an update on our Zephyr Wellness, which MAFE sponsored last year, and she shared with the group that there will be several Zoom webinars as part of our wellness series this year. On October 8th, there will be a Science of Motivation. And October 26th, there will be a Parenting in a Pandemic, helping give parents advice on setting limits during this time. So those are two things that may be interesting for parents to know about. Otherwise, they have set the date for their Legacy Night as April 10th, and it will be virtual.
I believe it will be renamed.
Yes, I think it's going to be, yes, and they're calling it right now the Spring Fundraiser. Right now, that's its name. So, some discussion about distributing angel funds, and that was about it. So,
Thank you. Next is MSBA legislative piece. I think we've covered that with the resolution, so no additional information there. Northeast Metro 916 Board.
I think I sent around, or I had Laura send around one of the last communications, but I don't know if this went around, that Connie Hayes, the longtime superintendent, has submitted her letter of resignation, which is a letter of retirement. She's done a lot of great work for 916 over the years, and now is able to take it easy, or easier, I should say. So that is something that is coming to the board. We're going to have to start working through that process of search, how we're going to go about it, and I'd appreciate at some point, Barb, maybe we could have some talk on that. I wouldn't mind Tony too, maybe because of the two, where do we feel as a district we are with in relation to 916, and what should I be aware of when I'm at the board table on how we see it going, and what we would, I think, the big piece is what do we want to see in a new leader of 916? What kind of vision maybe do we have in that, of what that person might look like? So that's the big news. The other piece is that 916 straddles 4 counties, and the whole issue around COVID and how 916 does school, especially with the special ed component being such a big part of their work. And again, Tony, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, what they're having to do is just incredible. It really is. I mean, to work with the level 4 students and all the different permutations that they have. Also then the career in tech, which is kind of hard to dismantle an automobile remotely. And so they are too looking at the learning model and potential changes. And so they, OSSEO apparently has engaged TeamWorks to figure a system that 916, I think we're going to take a look at what OSSEO and TeamWorks has put out, and we'll know more about that at the October board meeting.
Thank you.
That's my report.
All right. Any other board subcommittee reports?
Well, I suppose one of us should report out on the facilities and finance.
I think, am I the only one not on that committee?
You are the only one. So Julie gave us a little update tonight, as did Jeff. Jeff left. Yay, Jeff just left. But we had a lot of the same information from Jeff. But Julie gave updates. The asphalt that we laid in 2016 is 5 years old and it needs to be resealed this year. She gave us some really great pictures of all the work that they did as part of the EFS replacement and painting this year at the high school and middle school. She shared with us that there needs to be some work done on the wind turbine. Middle school, second floor, and the entryway got new carpeting, and she proposed a facilities walk around for the spring. So that was kind of her update.
Thank you. Stacy, go ahead.
I just wanted to share that the PTO, the elementary PTO met this week. And so they are back at it on Zoom, and I want to thank Alice because she helped them get that going. Again, they're looking at how they're going to do their meetings going forward. But I just wanted people to be aware that they are happening again, and so they should be looking at joining. And they're looking at Fun Run and some other of their fundraisers and how everything will look different this year, obviously. So. But I think you can find all the details on the website.
Thank you. Any other committee reports, group reports? Kevin, go ahead.
This is not a committee report, but I just wanted to put it out there that maybe I could have some time at a upcoming meeting, maybe the study session, to talk about the CUBE conference, the National School Board CUBE conference that I attended. virtually for the last 3 days. And CUBE is Council of Urban Boards of Education, and some wonderful sessions. And we had a number of really excellent keynote speakers. Cory Booker talked about his experience in New Jersey in the public education. He was great. But anyway, I do have some takeaways from that I'd like to share with this group, if I could, some things that might be applicable to what we're doing. And just, I also have the program, which a PDF, so I can send that out. And I think I'm going to be getting each of the sessions as a digital piece. So if anybody says, I really want to see this one on what they're doing down in Fort Worth, Texas on equity, I think, share that. So.
Great. We'll add that to a future agenda. Barb and I meet, we'll figure out where they'll fit. Okay. Anything else? All right. Superintendent's report.
Okay, so for my superintendent's report, I have been giving these updates as we've been, thank you, through the summer. I've been giving you updates on our planning to open for the year. I gave you an update on the opening. And now I would like to share with you one of the questions that comes up is how do we know when we're going to change learning models? We set up our learning models so that we could change back and forth among them. And so the question is, how are we going to go about doing that, and how are we going to make that decision? So I'm going to share with you our most recent updated on September 22nd, 2020, and we'll put this on the website, and we'll send information out to families as well, so that so everyone has this. But I'll just go through this with you. So just as an overview, I want to talk a little bit about each of our learning models and our foundation for 2021. What was it that we used in order to build these models? Also talk about the indicators that inform our current learning model operations, and then indicators that inform a learning model change. So just to recap, our 3 learning models. Model 1 is in person. It would be all of us together, and it would not include some of the current safety measures that we use around physical distancing. A lot of the same safety measures around cleaning, but not around the physical distancing. That would be one of the main differences for Model 1. Model 2 is a hybrid, which is what we're in right now, which is a mix of learning in person and also distance learning. And of course, Model 3 is distance learning 2.0, something different than what we did in the spring, but it would be with all of us in distance learning. So regardless of our learning model, these are the components that we talked about that serve as our foundations. We looked at really strengthening those relationships, teacher-student relationships, student-to-student relationships that strengthen academic and social emotional growth. Technology, making sure we have access, devices, and training. Instructional rigor and engagement. Flexible scheduling, really maximizing face-to-face learning opportunities for students who need the most direction and support. Making sure we had the fewest transitions or the least amount of physical interactions, groups of students. Structure, we've heard a lot that we needed structure for parents, and also preparation time for staff. You've heard that before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. So regardless of our learning model, we agreed that we would provide 5 days a week of continuous learning, consistent course and content expectations, those relationships again with educators, structure that supports everyone, staff, students, and families, and opportunities for academic reflection, exploration, and agency in their learning. So we were looking at continuous learning every day, online daily instruction with teachers based on regular schedule, face-to-face and recorded lessons to provide flexibility, online small group instruction, and independent practice and feedback. So that is what structured distance learning looks like. Okay, so indicators that inform our current learning model operation. So currently, we are in a hybrid model, and we've started, and as we get started, we learn more all the time. And so some things that we're doing now is we are working with staff. There are staff meetings that are ongoing. I know that our principals have also been doing informal and more structured conversations with students. But some things that I want to highlight is, one, we are planning for a survey of staff, families, and students in October. So we have, right now, we have scheduled that week of October 12th that we will have a survey opened for our staff and families, excuse me, and that October 5th through 9th to work with our students and have a student survey and other opportunities for small group conversations. So these are, this is one way you've asked when, how will we get feedback? This is one way we're going to start getting our feedback, in addition to some of the less formal ways. We want to take that survey information and share it with the incident command team on October 21st is our first time that we're going to do that. We also have another meeting we'll schedule on November 11th, and I'll explain that to you in a minute, how we intend to work with the incident command team. So when we talk about, so one of them is current, how are we doing currently in our current learning model, but we also want to talk about our decision to change learning models. How do we make that decision? So I'd want you to know that there are a number of indicators we need to consider. And Kevin just made reference to how OSSEO has laid it out, and that 916 will also be looking at it. We looked at OSSEOs as well. As part of this, a number of superintendents are working together to be able to talk about how is it that we really look at our indicators to make a change. So there are a number of indicators, and I talked to you about this before, but I think I can put this out here a little bit, to put this out here clearly so that we remember. It's not just the numbers that we look at when it comes to case count. That's the starting place, is that indicator of the case count by county in terms of positive cases per 10,000 people. So that's the first part, and that was the part that gave us the range where we could start. We also have to look at our staffing coverage. So our principals have really been thinking about what is our ability to staff our classrooms, because not only do we have to consider if our staff member gets sick, but there's also the quarantine that can happen. So if a staff member has a close contact or their child, they have to stay home with their child, there are some times when we may have some quarantine situations as well. So that's something that we have to look at as well. So these are our indicators. Student attendance, what's our ability of our classes, grades, and schools to operate based on the student COVID cases. Devices and technology, we feel really good about where we are in terms of our access to technology and support. Our health and safety operations, what's our ability to safely operate without those health and safety protocols. And then school services, childcare was a big part of our planning, and also nutrition and transportation. So here's our diagram of what our process is. So when we look at changing to a different model, we'll start with that there are indicators that reflect a need to shift to a different model. So it could be that our case counts are decreasing, and they have been recently. So our case counts decrease, that would indicate perhaps we're going to be able to shift into something that's less restrictive. Or it could be that they increase and we have to pay attention to that. So that's first one. Based on that, our leadership team, and we continue to do this impact analysis. In particular, we've been talking a lot about staffing and making sure we have a plan for how we can, so that we're not in a situation where all students come to school and we don't have staff to be able to deal with that. So we're trying to anticipate that a little bit better. So our leadership team would do an impact analysis. We'll share this with the incident command team. As as a reminder, so our incident command team consists of different members of our stakeholder in our school community that have different perspectives on the operations of the school. So we have students, they have one perspective here, and we do have an incident command team member sitting right over there. So we have students who give their perspective, they have certain questions. We have teachers, paraprofessionals, parents, we have health and safety, administrative team. So we have a number of people that can then give us feedback and ask us questions to help us with that impact analysis before that we come to the school board with a recommendation. To be able to present the learning model plan and change. Now, this is all if we don't have, our cases spike, for example, because if they do spike and we just have to go into distance learning, that is one response. This is more if we can plan. We see gradual changes one way or the other. So that's what I'm outlining here. Once we do have that recommendation to shift to our model, we do have some planning days that are built into our schedule. We can use up to 5 planning days during the year to help with the transition. So for example, one thing that if we are able to move into more in-person, that means we have to reorganize. We have lots of desks and ways that we have to reorganize our classrooms in order to move. We also have some more planning to do. How is it we're going to change our classroom routines? That would be something that we'd have to do. And then again, if we're going to all distance, we would need to do some more of that professional development in order to be ready and planning to do that. So that's what transitional planning would be about. And then we would have the implementation. So as a reminder, we may have a situation where, for example, our elementary schools are in person, but our secondary schools are still in hybrid, and that may happen. And when we made our models originally, we didn't expect this, if you recall, and then suddenly we had all these different ways it could happen. So this is important to know because when we have this situation when elementary is in person and secondary is in hybrid, and that would be our first move the first move that we would be able to make, it is the case that we need to keep our daily schedule so that our secondary it's still a shortened day. So we wouldn't be able to have the full day until we're both completely in person, and that's because of transportation and the way we have to operate in order to make our hybrid work. So I just wanted to remind you of that. But it would be our in-person, to have in-person, our specialists at the elementary, for example, would still be virtual, and it would just be that all our elementary students would be able to come 5 days a week. So we do have a calendar here, and it might be kind of hard to read them all at once, but I'm going to highlight a couple of different spots. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If it's back full-time, face-to-face, there's no social distancing, is there?
Right, well, and yes, okay, so that's a good question, and so something I want to just kind of mention, and we'll when we do our survey, we'll have some more things for people to consider. Some of the schools that have been fully in person have shared that when there is a case within a classroom, for example, and because there wasn't the physical distancing of more than 6 feet, that whole class has to be quarantined. But when we have situations where we can be at least 6 feet, then we don't have to quarantine. If we can maintain that, then we don't have to quarantine as many. So I only mention that because that'll be something that we're going to want to consider. Families are going to need to consider as we move forward. So in terms of that could happen, because that would be the difference.
That's something the ICT also will be taking into account?
Yeah, everyone's going to need to take. You're going to need to take that into account. Parents, we're all taking that into account.
Yeah.
Is that's a situation that could happen, and so, but we also don't have very high case rates at this point, which is a positive thing. So with all of this, I would want to put out there. Sorry, I have my back to you. I would want to put out there is whatever we come up with, there are going to be things that are not perfect. Okay, so what's the trade-off? And these are all things to consider and talk about, which is why we have this over the course of time here. we're talking about doing this planfully and thoughtfully as we consider, our first move is that elementary schools elementary students being back 5 days.
One other question. So whenever you're talking about the surveys and all the things as we're looking at this, will it encompass the physical concerns of the virus, but also mental health? And because those are the concerns we hear. So will all of those things try to capture a lens for each of those?
Yeah,
from
thanks.
all our
So,
families?
yes, and so I think it's worthwhile and we haven't fully designed our survey yet, but things that we do want to know about would be around those foundational pieces, which includes relationships and health, and so all of that, and getting parent feedback and student feedback on how these models are working. So, but for those, and I want to make sure everyone understands that what we're trying to do through those surveys as well is improve our current model. So what are those things that we need to do to improve our current model, not just what are the things we need to consider.
Also looking at academics.
Yeah, it's the whole,
And
yep.
rigor, as we talked about in our goals. Okay,
Right.
great.
And engagement.
Yes.
Yep, I think that's another. And the engagement, I'm going to emphasize that because I think that goes to, I think some of the things that were highlighted earlier by Ismail, and also when you talk about the mental health component, that's engagement is a big part of that, so.
But I'm going to reiterate what you said. So if we go to face-to-face model and someone tests positive in a classroom, that whole classroom, that very next day, goes into 2-week quarantine, fully distanced. There's still instruction happening, but it's fully distanced for 2 weeks with no advance notice to parents, except the night before pretty much saying, someone's tested positive, this classroom is now shut down.
That is the difficulty, yes.
Okay.
That is the difficulty. If we cannot maintain the 6 feet physical distancing, that is something to consider.
And usually that happens by classroom, not by school. Could it happen at the school level as well?
It could. Now, what we're trying to do, I want to say, is I think we've done a good job of preventing that from happening, because that happens if there's, in order to do the contact tracing, the question to start with has to do with that physical distancing and the masking. I mean, and so if those things are in place, we're in a situation where we don't have to continue. But otherwise, the contact tracing is to keep going from one to another, and there is the possibility that could happen if we weren't able to work through those protocols. But, so we might not, while we wouldn't be able to have that physical distancing within the classroom, we would still have our modified, we'd have our blocks so that kids would be in smaller groups for extended periods. We'll have our traffic patterns. So there are things that we can do to mitigate a lot of that, but the physical distancing would be is the main difference. So this is our calendar for our fall process for this, and I'm going to highlight that, so that October 12th and 18th through 18th is when we'll have those surveys going out to staff and family. We'll have that leadership team review the survey and also share it with staff, so staff can get that feedback right away, so that any kinds of feedback on the model, they'll have it and they'll be able to work through it. We'll have an incident command team meeting to be able to review some of that. We'll give you that school board update. And then I will skip down to that November 12th is the next time where we would be asking you, if we were in a situation, I'd want to say, where we have consistent numbers that are consistently low, because we also don't want a situation where we spend time planning to go into in-person and then right away we're back up into hybrid. So as an example, that's what we talked about when we first went into hybrid. We were moving upward. We saw the trend line that we were likely going to go to hybrid right away anyway, so we started in hybrid. Similarly, we would want to look for that consistently low range as our starting point to be even talk about going in person. And then we would have the preparation time be able to do that. So we would be looking at, in addition to asking you to approve going in person, we'd be looking to you to also approve using some of those instructional days to be able to prepare for it.
What do you envision that being approximately?
Well, one of our theories, right now, we just put this range of November 13th through the 25th as preparation time because we know, but that's not how many days we're talking about. We're not talking about that many days, but potentially right before Thanksgiving break. So right now, the 25th is a staff development day. Some of our staff has traded that time for prep time in August. So just, there are, but those other 2 days, that Monday, Tuesday before Thanksgiving, we think is a reasonable place to put a couple of those days for preparation. So that's our plan that we wanted to be able to communicate in terms of the process that we would be looking at.
So if the numbers were to dip down, because right now I think they're at 12.4, if they were to go below 10 for, whatever length of time we think they need to be before that, could you envision then also secondary returning in person?
So I want to be hopeful with you. I see that they're going to go back up again a little bit. So just, so but I want to be hopeful with you. Okay. I don't know. So I want to also mention that in addition to the numbers, we also have to consider our staffing. And so that's a significant factor. And then we also need to consider the number of students who will continue in distance learning. So I would like to be able to just look at the numbers, but I do know it's a lot more complicated than that. So that's my best answer at this time. But just like you, I know we have a lot of staff who are interested in seeing their kids on a regular basis. So we're going to continue, but we're going to continue to work through that. And I will also say it's always, all students, families have the option of distance learning regardless of the model, which is another thing we have to consider. If we're in person with people, a distance learning, that's also something that we have to pay attention to. So we have a lot of variables. That's our process, and we'll do the best we can. No, we're hopeful that by knowing the process, you understand that what we're thinking through, even though our variables continue to change, you at least know what we're considering and our timeline for it.
So the timeline and the process is all built upon the idea, as Stacey is saying, in terms of those numbers continuing to stay low, flat, or drop. If that's not the case, that changes the timeline, that changes the process?
There are so one thing that will not change is that we are still going to get our feedback on our current model so that we can make improvements. So that stays the same regardless, and then we'll continue to watch the numbers. So if it's the case that we go up and we're not on target to be able to go in person, then I think we would just take that same, I don't know, second half there and shift it to another time. But at least this will have taken us through the process so that we have a process in place to be able to move that forward.
So we also had discussion at one of our last meetings about the regional group. And so I was just curious how that came together, like who's helping you, like because we really didn't hear, or is it not really all together
No,
yet?
it is. So I have talked to them once so far. There is a regional representative, she's an OSHA specialist, is her, and she's through Metro XU, is our first line of contact. So I've contacted her once in particular about some of testing versus quarantining and all of that. And so she brought my questions to the Department of Health. And so there's a Department of Health representative, Department of Education representative, and she's kind of our person that kind of brings them together and says this is what we need to work on. If we were truly working on changing models, we would actually have a meeting with them where they would help us talk with us through that. I've also been in contact a couple of times with our Washington County epidemiologist, who is also part of our advisory team in all of this. So they do have their processes in place, and that's been helpful. I know other districts have used them more because they're in distance and they're trying to get into hybrid, so. Mhm. Okay. And that's what I wanted to share.
I think it's really excellent work. It's a nice template. And so I want to thank you and the team for really being very thoughtful and planful on this.
You see them out there.
I see them out there.
Thank you.
The camera at home might not see them out there.
All those
That's the
bright
team
eyes
out
there. But I just wanted to thank everyone that's been a part of this process. I mean, it just seems very thoughtful and deliberate. And there are a lot of different variables, but you have to have a plan. The plan may change, but you have to have a plan. This looks like a good one, so thank you for that work.
Bright eyes or tired eyes?
All right. There's no other items on the agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Thank you.
Second.
Moved by Stacy, seconded by Julie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you so much.